so you can mention me and make any comments about what I'm about to say. I also have a blog, which I welcome you to check out, Learning Agile and Lean in one big word, .wordpress.com. You can also see that I love regional Agile conferences, and you can also guess that I'm the kind of the guy who brings Kanban to those conferences. And an interesting thing, I was actually at a major Kanban conference only about 2 weeks ago, and gave the same presentation, slightly shorter one actually, that I'm giving today, and it's not about Kanban at all. So a few words about myself as an introduction. I was born in this city. This is Leningrad, or now known as St. Petersburg. But I spent nearly all my adult life and pretty much the entire career in North America. And nowadays I live in Waterloo in southwestern Ontario. And this is sort of the work I do. I'm with a company of about 800 people, and we've got 3 Agile coaches there. So I got into that role first, so that's me, and that's Paul and Andrew. And we are the 3 Sherpas helping 800 climbers. So you can imagine my job is pretty interesting. I've been also active in the Agile community in Central Canada for a while, and I'm the founder of the first Canadian chapter of the Limited Whip Society, which is a group of professionals interested in lean knowledge work. So you can see how some people want to fire the desk manager Carlos, and you might recognize some of the speakers we have at our group. So some people who are here today attended the continuous improvement tutorial yesterday. And it was in that tutorial where we actually put the pencil to the paper, which is how those A3 sheets actually work, what you have on your tables. So what I could do today is to go through those sheets, all of 12 sections, one by one, and tell you about each of them, and show you how one leads to the next logically, and help problem solvers focus their thinking and understand the problem deeply, and so on and so forth. That would probably take about an hour at a pretty fast pace of 5 minutes per section, and you'd get another 78-minute talk, and well, I guess not exactly that. I'm afraid it's going to be more like a much-needed afternoon nap, or a head start on our evening social event, whatever and wherever that is. So instead, I'm going to talk about something more interesting, the fascinating and sometimes frustrating human interactions around continuous improvement, or around some complex problem that can be facilitated using, for example, that A3 sheet. And at the same time, I want to establish A3 thinking as an evolutionary improvement method that can provide improvement options to your organization. The organizers warned me when we talked about my coming here to talk, that last year there was a fair amount of presentations about Kanban. So how many people have been to the last year's event and been exposed to that? By show of hands. Some people. So successful evolutionary change for your technology business. So today we're going to talk about evolutionary change once again, but with a different method. So I'd like to establish that as a method. And in order to establish it and to illustrate these concepts, I'm going to tell a story, but I'm going to have to cut it short because, obviously there are some important other things to talk about. And throughout that story, I want to make a number of important stops. So let's do another show of hands. How many people here are agile coaches or Kanban coaches or organizational transformation coaches or change agents, managers who are leading or influencing such change in their organization? Quite a few. And others might actually end up in that role, or you work with someone in that role already. So I'm going to make a number of stopping points in this presentation to stop and think about the situation and how you can do something about it as a change agent, and what thinking tools you can use to help you make a better decision. So that sounds like an ambitious agenda, and I'll try to get through it in about 50 minutes. So the start of the story was very interesting. It felt like a recurring attack of the Cylons on the remnants of the human race aboard this spaceship, Battlestar Galactica. Well, except in this case it was not Cylons, but a glitch in the firmware of a data storage device in the data center that was from time to time unleashing attacks and taking down entire server farms. And for people aboard this ship, so to speak, it felt pretty much the same way. They had to stop whatever they were doing, cancel family plans for the next few hours, and without raising their hand above the keyboard, pretty much, defeat that attack. And then it would happen again. The vendor of that particular piece of hardware, which I can't name, but it's a well-known data storage company, was baffled and wise that their equipment would behave that way. They eventually collaborated on the workaround and resolution. But after 3 such attacks, I was brought into this situation by a senior executive who used this kind of language to introduce myself, and to introduce me, to my great relief. Because this is the first stopping point in the story. Don't sell methodology. By using this kind of language, he made it very easy for the struggling data center folks to accept help. If he said, I think A3 thinking could help you, the most likely reaction would be, why do you think so? And we're really in the crisis right now. We don't have time to learn new methodology. So I was more than happy to take a ride inside this vehicle. So I meet with people in incident management, and they tell me the story of the 3 incidents. They give me a timeline. They show me the root cause analysis report. So I look at those reports, and something is going through my mind, and I'm going to tell you about it. This is the next step, stopping point. And I'm going to tell you something that I didn't say at the time, and for a good reason. And the reason I can say it now, because because I know that the people who would hear those words would not be offended if they find the recording of this presentation online later, because they have been through training with me. They have started working on their own E3s, and we analyze their steps and missteps. so they know what I'm about to tell you. So my reaction to these root cause analysis was this. I don't see any analysis here. I see a statement of the root cause. And I don't think anybody actually cares about this root cause. This is indeed a root cause, but it's a root cause of something that no one cares about. And the reason not to say those things, which I didn't say, is that people have emotional attachment to their work. And in this case, that report contained a lot of useful information, which strictly has nothing to do with root cause analysis. But it was accurate and valuable to the company. And people did it with great accuracy, timeliness, and pride. And in Lean, and these are the two pillars of it, respect for people means a number of things. And in this case, it means not judging people who are doing the work. How many people have done some coding for at least a few years in their careers? Pretty much everyone. So you know this familiar situation. You start with a new company or a new team. You check out their code base. You look at some piece of code written by the guy in the next cubicle 5 years ago, and you go like, what was he thinking? Exactly. You don't know what he was thinking. No one knows. That's not ours to know. The best we can assume is that people did their best job under the circumstances. And what we see on the screen right now is the product of the organizational constraints, the culture, the management that existed, and circumstances that existed at that point in time. So not judging is important in continuous improvement. So why did I think that was not, that it was a cause of something they didn't actually care about? Well, let's think again. What is this the root cause of? We start with an unknown unknown. As I said, even the hardware vendor didn't know it. That unknown unknown causes an incident. Once the incident happens, it becomes a known unknown. Then we do the root cause analysis, it becomes a known known. Again, who cares? It turns out of multiple, I can't give you the exact number for confidentiality reasons, clients that were affected by this, one CIO actually cared. He wanted to blame the what, so he didn't have to fire the who. But others had a very different idea, and so this was a powerful moment in the story to rediscover the purpose of those customers. What is the purpose for buying software as a service? Well, it's because the clients wanted to provide some service to their own customers. And that mission was violently interrupted when their server farms went down. And they couldn't care what glitch took them down, if only we could restore service fast enough. But that wasn't happening, and as a result, and a trip to sales operations quickly revealed which clients had their contract up for renewal pretty soon and how many of them were threatening cancellation of either hosting services or the entire product suite, and to quantify that risk. That information captured in the background section of an A3 very quickly brought it to attention of many people that that root cause was actually disconnected from the customer service. The root cause that we initially thought was the root cause. And the incident itself was not the problem. The problem was somewhere in the organizational capability to deal with such accidents, if they should happen at any time. So how many people recognize the person in this picture? Initials DK. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, although he's not an economist, but a psychologist. That is a very impressive feat. And he accomplished it by establishing a whole new field of behavioral economics. And one of the key premises in it is that humans don't think rationally. They don't think like abstract human beings in the economic models of the past. They make irrational decisions. Kahneman wrote a very popular book, Thinking Fast and Slow, in which it's a 500-page book. He summarized decades of his research in a very popular, accessible form. And to reduce that book to something that I can tell you about in a minute, it basically comes down to System 1 and System 2, which are the two competing systems inside human brain. And the System 1 is the emotional one, and the one that learns slowly but reacts really fast. And the System 2 is the rational one. It learns fast, but it's very slow to react. It's slower than the pocket calculator. And so my System 2 understands all this stuff about root cause analysis and about relations to the customer problem and our organizational challenges. If I'm to use this system to talk to the System 1 of people in incident management who take great pride in that root cause analysis report, what's going to happen? You can't win an emotional debate with a rational argument. So, after that initial conversation, as well as the trip to sales, the investigation trail turned to cover many departments of the organization. Support, we're in the front lines of handling the spiking call volume. The deployment services folks that were responsible for running the validation software before those servers were handed over to clients, and who were not happy about how that process worked, and questioning how that process works and what involved led to the enterprise architecture group. And as we found that the causes of what was going on were deeper and deeper in software rather than the operations side of things where the pain was felt, we got into some product development teams. And all these groups used appropriately different process and improvement methodologies. There's great variety than just the agile methodologies that we typically talk about at agile conferences. And yet somehow the challenge was to bring them on board together and find some way to improve the situation, improve the organizational capability to respond to such incidents. And now it turned out that each of these departments behaved in a way like a very ancient social structure that you can find in human societies. But that structure is not family. What's another really old social structure known to humankind?
Tribes.
Yes, this was the hint. Indeed. Now the word tribe is becoming popular in the agile circles as people are kind of using some models of tribal behavior to explain things that happen in organizations. I'd like to focus that conversation a little bit and tell you about tribal behavior, how you can interpret it in the workplace. So sometimes tribes are defined by size. There's a popular definition of it that's up to 150 people. Sometimes by some other characteristics. So the particular definition that I found useful, and such tribal behavior has been observed on a very small scale, such as the group of IT ops people who use this sort of language. It's fascinating, by the way. So I was talking to one of the network architects during this investigation, and so let's run a simple test. I'm going to explain to you something that he explained to me, but using my own words. You tell me if this makes sense or this is a lot of mumbo jumbo. So he described to me that when you restart a number of servers at the same time, these are all virtual machines, but they are hosted on some physical equipment, right? And under that physical equipment, there are physical disks that the operating system and programs load from. So if you restart too many of them at once, there is a risk that you will thrash those disks, and the result, none of the servers can actually restart. So there is a limit to how many you can restart at the same time. Now, is that fairly understandable? More or less. So if you've worked in IT for some time, you probably get what I'm talking about. Well, the interesting thing that he used in this very explanation, maybe 4 or 5 different acronyms that made this explanation completely incomprehensible. That's how the tribe meets its needs to separate itself from outsiders and establish the boundaries. And it doesn't have to include 150 people. In this case, I think it included about 10. So this is one of the ways you can recognize tribal behavior in the workplace. So one particularly useful way of thinking about tribes in the workplace is this. When I'm about to communicate something to another human being in the workplace, I have to be aware that they can take what I'm about to tell them, combine that with their tribal affiliations, and produce some kind of understanding that is completely surprising to me. And that surprising and unexpected can be both good and bad. And if only I had some way to predict whether it would be good or bad, then if it's good, I would amplify it. And if it's bad, I would steer clear from it. So is there some way to actually accomplish it? So this book, Great Boss, Dead Boss, by Ray Immelman, presents, in the business novel form, a model of tribal behavior that helps predict such reactions. It is a highly predictive model. That model is somewhat complicated. It has 5 tribal dimensions. This is an example of one of them. And 23 successful attributes of a strong tribe, and 8 tribal communication modes. So that's out of the scope of this talk, but if I could reduce that model, well, I don't encourage completely bastardizing it, but if I could take a couple of things out of it that you can take out of this room today and practice in your workplace on Monday. One is create a bigger tribe. Smaller tribe would be less secure against some challenge, but they come together, form a bigger tribe. People feel more secure. They start interpreting the information that you give them differently. And another thing is shuttle diplomacy. Don't face the whole tribe at once if you have something unpleasant to tell them, or something that challenges their tribal beliefs. Talk to one person at a time. Yes, that means walking around the building a lot, but that's the kind of interaction across the organization that has to take place in order for your message to get across to those people. So, the investigation proceeded, and we were about to grasp the current condition, which is one of the sections on the left side of the A3 that you have on your table. And the important part here is go and see. Meet with people who actually do the work, where they do the work. Don't schedule meeting rooms for those meetings. Go to the place where they actually do the work at their desks, such as this area where the support people worked, which quickly disproved one of the closely held tribal beliefs that those network administrators actually jumped into action at the first sign of the problem. It turned out that that belief was based on their belief in their automated tools, which is one of the tribal symbols, by the way, in the Immelman model. So those tools would send an instant notification to network administrator's phone. Problem is, there's human reaction time between that notification and they're actually doing something about it. It turned out that several times faster than they could react, the network of human sensors working in support could detect the pattern, the changing pattern in incoming calls from customers, and detect the problem without any tools, and respond faster to it. By now you probably understand that this was not something that my system 2 would bring to the system 1 of the manager of the network administration group, right? And so, by doing quite a bit of shuttle diplomacy and talking to a bunch of experts, reconstructed the current situation, actually the process of what people actually do, and different steps involved in restoring the service. So the main things in there are there's several timelines, somewhat overlapping, and there's the total duration of the outage. For confidentiality reasons, all time units are scaled. So the bed metric is there, 800 to 900. That's how long it took to restore it in those 3 incidents. We got it down to 100. Doing the same thing 8 times faster in 4 weeks. Finding the right improvements. So that's, to give you the preview of the end of the story. So the main contributors to that long timeline were the number of servers that had to be restarted and how long that took, and also the time that was necessary to actually validate that they were running. So the important thing is that once the server is restarted, we want to notify the client and say, your server farm is up and running. We don't want to be wrong at that. So we want to run some kind of validation test. And it turned out, wait a second. It turned out that while the company had a fair bit of test automation, there were regression tests, acceptance tests, build validation tests, deployment health checks, and even an ongoing monitoring thingy where some capacity of the server was consumed by a test client once in a while checking different pages. So it was fairly sophisticated. But there was no suite written to address this particular risk of restart. So with even bigger tribe, and this involved bringing on board support and deployment people and some enterprise architecture as well, that tribe came together to actually define what the problem is. And the problem statement, which you can find roughly in the middle of the left side of A3 that lies on your table, was defined like this. And this is one of the important A3 tricks, defining the problem as a gap. So, for example, there is some expectation, such as the talk takes about 60 minutes, right? And then there is the reality, which is that it takes 78 minutes on average. And so the problem is the 18-minute gap. And defining the problem like this, let me go back to this, go forward to this, gives us a very strong opening why. So why the gap? Why does it take longer? And then we can play the game of 5 whys and try to get the causes of that. So once we stated the problem, we could set the target of our improvement exercise. And that target was to bring the downtime down to some number. The bigger tribe agreed on what that number should be. And time boxes, pick a date when we wanted to get it done. Now that we're talking about downtime, that obviously meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And, well, downtime sounds like a metric, right? And we already have a number of process metrics in place. And so people were asking questions like, what do we do with our KPIs? And what do we do with the, SLA credit calculation, things like that. So these are all attributes of the existing culture. Well, SLAs are contractual. There's nothing you can do about them, so you have to keep track of them. And what about KPIs? Well, let me give you a hint. These events were happening in late March, and the way KPIs worked at this particular company was that at the start of the year, that means we have to talk about it like November-ish, the company would set objectives for the whole company, for different divisions and departments. Then they would derive KPIs that would track their progress on those objectives. And those KPIs would be enforced for the whole calendar year. What can you do about those KPIs in March? You can wait till next year, which is not the timeline for solving the problem. So the answer is nothing. So they have the KPIs, let's keep their KPIs. What is important, however, is that we agreed on a temporary metric. This metric has an expiration date, and it's used for one single purpose, which is to measure how we're closing that gap. That is the definition of our problem. So what the downtime was, well, it means different things to different clients. If we're going to use one of those to measure improvement, then we're only going to have arguments like, but for that client, we did it faster. If we use that KPI, well, things look great already according to that KPI. That does not prevent a number of clients from canceling our services. So we agreed on a different metric. We agreed what it is to and from. And this metric is only useful for one thing, how we close the gap. And when our experiment is over, then we dispose of this metric. It's no longer useful. So we did some 5-why analysis, and that led to a number of potential causes that we could address, such as rebooting takes too long, and that was because some of the services are slow to start, and that is because the performance of those services hasn't been profiled by software engineers in a while, and so on and so forth.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you said.
And so with that, the left side of A3 came together, and that's a lot of work. And that is just the P part of the PDCA cycle. Plan, do, study, or sometimes it's called check. It's PDCA. And the way A3 evolved in Toyota was deliberate. So people counter their natural tendency to jump to solutions. A3 actually goes a little bit further. Well, before I tell you how it goes further, so here's an interesting quote which is sometimes attributed to Einstein, although there is no evidence he actually said that. If I only had 1 hour to save the world, I'd spend this much time defining the problem, and only that much finding the solution. And we found out that proportion was roughly correct in our case. So A3 is not only about not jumping to solutions, but also about not jumping to problems. So if you look back at the blank A3 sheet on your table, roughly the upper left quarter of it is about simply understanding the current condition before we even state what the problem is. Oh well. So the do part, and this is where we get into the countermeasures in A3, that is really just an experiment. And in this case, the experiment failed. A new accident happened early enough before the organization could come together and actually do anything about preventing it. So the hypothesis, the do part, you can plan it and specify countermeasures and actions. But then comes the real test. So can the organization actually act upon its intent in time to prevent something like this? And in this case, it failed. And I'd like to use this moment to kind of zoom out on the bigger picture of what we were doing. The current condition, where it takes 8 times as much to restore service, is where we are. So we took some time to understand it. The vision where we want to go is no downtime. And in the direction of that vision, we can pick a challenge. Well, bring that downtime to some smaller number. And that challenge is outside the comfort zone. So it's kind of unknown. It feels like we could get there by improving our processes. At the same time, it's not like we can just start doing it tomorrow. It's outside people's comfort zone, but not too far outside. And then the PDCA cycles, facilitated using those A3s, are experiments that can help us get through that zone of uncertainty between the current condition and between our challenge. And altogether, these elements form the thing known as the improvement kata, which is described in this book. And this is very interesting stuff. This book by Mike Rother was written in 2010. And somehow he discovered something inside Toyota that eluded a whole generation of scholars. And then it was in 2012 that an agile coach from Sweden, Håkan Fors, figured out how to apply Toyota improvement kata in the context of software and IT. And then how many people have read the Phoenix Project? #1 agile book of 2013. The business novel about, this is like basically the Eli Goldratt's goal for IT operations. Massive turnaround of a really struggling IT shop. So at the end of Phoenix Project, the authors mention this improvement kata, but they only give it like one paragraph. And that's because they were drafting their novel in late 2012, and the improvement kata for IT and software was pretty much only documented in 2012. So the relationship between A3 and the improvement kata is twofold. On one hand, we can use A3 to facilitate each step in the improvement kata. On the other hand, the improvement kata asks a number of questions that don't have easy answers, such as, well, it says grasp the current condition. How exactly am I supposed to do that? Well, that's what the first quarter of A3 is about. A3 can help. How do I establish the next current condition? A3 can help with that. What is a good challenge? That's an interesting question. We actually pondered it quite a bit in the workshop yesterday. And in my experience, it turns out that vision is usually the easy part. Because if we have a software process that produces some rate of escape defects, the vision could be zero defects. If we have IT operations process that results in some downtime, you can say the vision is no downtime. The vision doesn't have to be realistic or attainable. All that matters is that we can improve towards it. If we work with, let's say, physical equipment or materials in a factory, some people get injured. And the vision could be no injuries ever. It may be unrealistic, but we can improve towards it. The challenge, however, is the difficult part. What does it mean kind of outside the comfort zone, but not too hard? Well, that's the answer to these questions actually require some leadership. And to give you one example, to illustrate this by example, during that series of incidents, one director asked me, when the A3 was kind of filled in, roughly half of it, like this, why don't we set a much more ambitious target and let's design this thing to be this short? So he gave me a number. That number clearly indicated that the absence of thinking about a few important things that are central to continuous improvement. What is the process? How do we know it's improving? And how is it improving? If the person who asked me that question actually pondered what is the current process, then he would have realized that the human reaction time to a mobile phone notification about the outage was several times greater than the number that he gave me. If he pondered what his own process was, he would have realized that the measurement precision actually exceeded that number. So, even if we could design it that way, how would we know? And that was a clear indicator that what we were talking about was something way behind the horizon. That was just bravado and speculation. And the good challenge is somewhere on the horizon. If we know the direction where we're going, pick a point on the horizon and find a way to get there through this challenging terrain. So eventually, even a bigger tribe came together. with the help of enterprise architecture and some software development teams, there was a very interesting and somewhat emotional discussion, because people who created various test automation tools obviously had their own emotional attachment to it. And eventually one of them let go and said, we're going to create a new tool, because none of what we have is fit for this particular purpose. We have the ingredients, let's get down to the design. And it was actually work that took two guys a couple of days to do. Once we really knew the point of leverage on the problem. And so other sections on A3 that you can see on the table are kind of among them. A really interesting part is the indicators. And those indicators are how we learn, how we know that something is an improvement. So we measure and observe, we see what it was before, and we see what it is now. And we agree that that's improvement of our process. So rather than, again, delve into details of how this is done, I'd like you to ponder an interesting question. How many countermeasures do we really need? Let's say we know the problem, we know what causes it. We're proposing countermeasures. How many do we really need? And why are the indicators really important? To continuous improvement. All right, so to begin answering this question, I have to put up this framework. So how many people recognize what this is? Two. How many people know how to pronounce it? All right, it's a Welsh word, so it's challenging. So this framework is pronounced Cynefin, which is, doesn't really matter how it translates from Welsh. It's too complex, I should say. So this is a framework that's based on the premise that various things around us in the world have different ways of existing. And therefore, and the problems that we face have different ways in which causes and effects are connected. And making sense which is important, because very different course of action is required for each of them. So based on how causes and effects are connected, Cynefin sorts all sorts of problems into 4 big domains. So I can't present like the whole framework and what it is about, just to point out the 2 domains that are really important to us. And they're known as the upper domains, complex and complicated. The complicated is one of the ordered domains, and complex is, along with chaos, is unordered. And the complicated looks like this. When you hear this machine is complex because it has 1,000 moving parts in it, then it's really not complex. It's complicated. That's the complicated domain language. This is expert analysis driven. This is something an expert can figure out using their good practices. But if the expert wrote those recipes on a piece of paper and gave them to you, or me, we would not be able to reproduce the same result, because this guy's, after all, an expert. And the complex is very different. The difficulty here is not the number of moving parts, but the very weak and retrospective coherence between causes and effects. So it's like traffic in India, or like this flock of geese. You cannot predict or calculate the trajectory of any of these birds. It doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense as a whole. And it's driven by feedback that each of these birds receives from all other birds and the environment every split second. that causes them to adjust how they fly. And altogether, there is a complex behavior that you cannot replicate by charting the trajectory of each of the birds and then putting it together. It's impossible to do because that's the nature of it. And so a lot of organizational improvement problems fall into that complex domain because the human dimension of it will make it complex rather than complicated. And what's important in that complex domain is to apply evolutionary rather than design change. And the key part of successful evolution, well, actually there are two. One is creating variety, creating multiple options, competing, perhaps concurrent experiments, and then the selection using the fitness test. And then on the A3 form, that little square tucked on the right side, the indicators, the study of the check part, the C part of the PDCA cycle. That's the evolutionary fitness test. If you apply it, then A3 thinking works as an evolutionary improvement method. So all our planning and all the doing, that is really a hypothesis. Will this course of action actually produce improvement? And this is the scientific test. As for how many options we need multiple, because that's what we can infer from Kinevin, but not too many. Because if we have multiple options, what can happen? We run the risk that one of them will succeed. And what happens if one of them succeeds? We change the current condition. And remember, the problem is the gap. So if we move the current condition, the gap is now in a different place. We ask 5 whys, we get different answers. We ask why is that, we get still different answers. So the analysis is different. The countermeasures, the future countermeasures will be different. Their feasibility may be different. We found out, for example, that some of the new options were uncovered because the gap was in a different place after the first experiment. We also found that some course of countermeasures that we previously thought were feasible were no longer feasible. So too many options initially. A lot of things that go eventually onto an A3, lots of those sections are driven by expert analysis. So when you ask what is the current process for restoring an outage in the data, service after an outage in the data center, you talk to experts who work there, and they give you information that helps you restore the timeline. There's expert analysis. Lots of other things, those are just examples. They all come from experts. But what if we fill the entire E3 sheet based on that expert analysis? Well, you know what's going to happen. The understanding of other humans in the organization will not catch up to it. It's an experiment that is not safe to fail. So what can we do? Well, this is from one of the foremost experts on A3. A partially completed A3 sheet, which means, well, it's completed partially. And let's say our current agreement is that we kind of agree on what's on it already. We add one section to it from expert analysis, and we run an experiment. The hypothesis being, will the understanding of other people catch up to it? And if not, then what can you do? Roll it back. You can't proceed any further, because that becomes a worthless piece of paper. Because people will not follow what you write on that piece of paper. However, if it does, now we have a shared understanding that encompasses more things, deeper understanding of the problem, and now we can take another experimental step in tackling. So the interesting thing is between those complex and complicated domain, and we see this cycle back and forth between complex and complicated, in a lot of other areas of work is that the solution to the problem emerges as a cycle between expert analysis and the alignment of others in the organization. And that alignment is continuously tested for fitness as things should be in the complex domain. And so when I was a kid and kind of struggled with this exercise, the coach came up to me and said, well, you know, this is not about developing bulky muscles. This is all about practice and making those muscle fibers work well together. And so what happened in this incident story is we practiced and we found the right fibers here and there and made them work together to pull up the whole organization and increase its capability in a short amount of time. So I'd like to close this by leaving you with a couple of questions to ponder. A lot of conversation about methodology in the workplace focuses about what is a good process for us. And people go up to a whiteboard and draw boxes and arrows. You could sense, perhaps, that this is something different. It doesn't give you any boxes and arrows. You have to bring your own. So is A3 thinking a method without methodology? Another interesting question is the rocks of emotional resistance, the tribes that would reject your perfectly rational idea. Those are all like rocks in that stream. Can you go around them like water? Is A3 thinking a method that can help you do that? And finally, so I'm basically getting into the final part of the talk where I just want to endorse some good sources of learning. So this is really cool. So this is an app by Claudio Perona, who's one of the foremost experts on A3, especially how it applies in knowledge work. So I mean, this is a really cool app that you can use to really focus the thinking of people working on that A3 template. Available on iPhone, iPad, or Android devices. And it's a set of thinking cards that you can go through and ask yourself various focusing questions. So there's a couple of useful presentations. So one of them is by Claudio about A3, another one is by Håkan Fors that explains the Toyota Kata. I actually endorse all of it except the stop doing retrospectives part. I actually met Håkan two weeks ago in Hamburg, and he said that this is purely to get your attention. What he really meant was you can use this kata in your retrospective, so that instead of suggestions, you can really grasp what is going on, get the improvement direction, and select your suggestions based on how they align with that improvement direction. There are some really good books. This is a classic written by one of the first people to practice Toyota production system in North America, John Shoup. And its main message is A3 develops people and people solve problems, not A3 solves problems. And then there's a whole bunch of other good books. So strictly speaking about A3, it's a pretty dense book by Sobek, Understanding A3 Thinking. Toyota Kata, of course, that explains the improvement kata, I already mentioned it. So these are manufacturing classics. But because we're not in manufacturing, but in knowledge work, we have to look further. So great explanation of tribal behavior by Immelman in Great Boss, Dead Boss, or the condensed version of it in The Lessons in Agile Management by that Kanban guy. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is pretty much becoming a must-read for anyone who works in any sort of intellectual field nowadays. I keep hearing mentions of it in all sorts of situations. Tim Harford's Adapt really goes to the core of evolutionary change and how it works and the logic of it. So this is not an IT book or a psychology book, it's about evolution of complex systems. And then of course, the Kinevin framework and the cognitiveedge.com website, where there's a wealth of information, videos, and numerous blog posts by Dave Snowden. And here's a number of people, and I just have to thank all of them because my interactions with them led directly to a lot of this knowledge and practical, actionable guidance that helped me greatly in my job as one of those Sherpas guiding hundreds of climbers. And this is the summary of the talk that I gave in Hamburg about 2 weeks ago, and the takeaways of the attendees. So I had no input whatsoever to the visual facilitation artists who drew this. So people just walked out of the room where I gave the talk, and they gave it to him, and then he drew this. So one thing they missed is the evolutionary part, so I added that back. But other than that, that's pretty much summarizes it. And this is my contact information again, and thank you very much.